Namaskar. The Syrian civil war began in 2011 along with the Arab Spring, and it soon developed into a multi-sided armed conflict with several international players involved. The Syrian government, supported by Russia, Iran and Iraq, in quelling what was considered initially to be a rebellion by the army rebels under the Free Syrian Army opposed to President Assad. The FSA was initially supported by Western powers, and in 2013, Iran-backed Hezbollah entered the war in support of the Syrian government. The conflict took the shape of a Sunni-Shia war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the forces opposed to the Syrian government are many, and most are not united, fighting amongst themselves. They include the Free Syrian Army, the Salafist forces, the Al-Nusra Front linked to the Al-Qaeda, the Syrian Kurds, and of course ISIS, which has emerged as the force that is pushing international groups to come together to eliminate it. ISIS entered the war in 2014 and has taken control of vast areas of Syria, and more than half the population of Syria, that's about 10 million people, have been displaced, and the death toll is huge. Estimates are between 200,000 and 500,000. Several attempts at peace have failed, and the most recent being the Geneva peace process earlier this month. However, Russia and the United States have announced a provisional agreement on a ceasefire. The day after that announcement, at least 150 people were killed, 120 actually, in deadly car bombs in Homs and Damascus. And to discuss whether there is a peace, whether there could be a truce in Syria, that elusive truce, we have with us in the studio Mr. P.R. Chakravarty, as a former Secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs, and Manoj Joshi is Senior Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We'll start with you, Mr. Chakravarty. There are too many sides in this war, and there's too much damage already. But one wonders, do the world powers have it in them to negotiate peace?
Well, ultimately, peace can only be negotiated by the Syrians themselves.
Okay.
Because you can impose a certain amount of blueprint from outside, but it is the people of Syria who will ultimately have to come to a political settlement. And the fact is, the external intervention simply aggravates the situation, which Syria is a classic case. So is Libya, by the way, where external intervention actually has basically made Libya a failed state. And the rise of ISIS too is because of external intervention. I mean, because of American intervention in Iraq, which finally led to the collapse of the old regime, and the damage done to the administrative and others military structures there.
Mr. Joshi, but ISIS now has emerged as the common enemy, at least. And, well, the US still insists that the solution has to be without Assad in the picture. The question that some people will raise is, what solution can there be without Assad?
That's true. You see, the thing is that we are not being told the real truth about this. The real truth is that fighting alongside the ISIS is the Al-Nusra Front, which is an Al-Qaeda outfit. The other opposition is virtually not worth its name. And then you have Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Now, all these countries have been, all these entities are involved in fight against Mr. Assad. And no one has a solution, meaning there was a solution offered back in 2012. Kofi Annan had a peace plan, but that was torpedoed by the Americans.
That also had Assad in the picture.
That had Assad in the picture, but see, the point is, whatever transition occurs, you can't have a transition where you would simply say, Assad, go, and someone else will come, because given the division of forces there, I really don't know whether Syria can even survive as the entity it was, or whether or not it needs to be partitioned.
Ambassador Chakravarty, the solution cannot be a military one. That's why obviously there is negotiation now for a peace process. And one would have to create a stable state. But looking at the state of Syria, how does one go about creating a stable state here? That's the question.
I can't even imagine that Syria will be stable in the short term. And if at all there is stability, I sometimes fear that that stability may come out of some kind of a partition plan of Syria. That each group gets a little piece of territory, and then they keep that with them. and maybe some kind of a ceasefire or violence can stop. And then, but as long as the IS is sitting there in Raqqa, which is in Syria, and parts of course, Iraq, I don't see how that stability can come, even if the other groups were to agree. And it's very unlikely. But don't forget the geostrategic sort of interests, not just of the US and Russia, but of Saudi Arabia and Iran and Turkey now.
Right.
Because Turkey is, I think, extremely worried that the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds and the Turkish Kurds and other Kurds in that region will link up and control the border with Turkey. And Turkey is already feeling the heat from this because of bombings, which they blame, of course, on the Kurds, but also on the IS. So Turkey is becoming a major player. It always was, because it fueled the sort of civil war in Syria.
Right. And Assad is definitely opposed to Turkey's presence. But you know, many of the forces that are opposed to Assad, except for those groups that you mentioned with the Al-Nusra Front and ISIS, they are democratic. At least they claim to be democratic. They're looking for a democratic kind of a solution. So could there be, you know, some sort of a democratization in that sort of process?
You know, I think the politics has slipped so much to the extreme part. I'm saying you have the ultimate Sunni extremist group, the ISIS, on one hand, who are occupying large chunks of Syria. So I can't see a democratic solution occurring here in short order.
I mean, if one has to overthrow this process, and then you have to have a democratic. In fact, that's what Mr. Chakravarty started with, the Syrian people deciding the solution themselves.
There is no Syrian people left anymore. Meaning, there is no Syrian people left anymore. So many have become refugees. They are divided. They are divided by their religious sectarian lines. Now, you know, this is that old story about Humpty Dumpty. You know, once Humpty Dumpty falls off the wall, how do you put Humpty Dumpty together again? And this, there were fault lines in Syria, fault lines in Libya, which were papered over, and fault lines in Iraq. But with the military intervention, external military intervention, those fault lines have been exposed, and now I'm not so sure whether you can cover them up again. I think maybe partition, but you know, I don't want to sit here in India and say that, you know, partition this country. We ourselves have been victims of a partition. And we don't like the idea of partition. But perhaps the world should be thinking along those lines.
Ambassador Chakravarty, can Russia play a significant role here? Because what's actually happened is that the European Union is now divided about the role that Assad will be playing in the future because of the migration issue going out of hand. They are not standing together. The United States is also probably, you know, having to think its strategy, because it didn't really quite have a clear idea about what they were doing in Syria in the first place. They didn't know who they were supporting. At this point in time, it seems that Russia seems to have the best option to lead this process.
Well, the Russian intervention in Syria certainly changed the game plan of whoever else were trying to intervene and set things right, which includes things like Assad has to go, and we will have a different dispensation, etc. So the Russian
regime change,
that was popularly called regime change. But the Russian intervention certainly sort of put a spoke in the sort of wheel there. Now the question is, will Russia succeed? That is the question.
Can Russia lead the process?
Can Russia lead the process? Russia will definitely try, and as you can see in Geneva, it's a part of the thing. But I think the peace process is kind of a track which will depend on the ground reality, whether it will succeed or not. Now, Russia has certainly made a difference to the Assad regime, and Assad regime is today probably sitting or has already captured Aleppo, which is a very major city in the north. Now, the Russian intervention will probably help Assad to recapture a certain amount of territory. But how much they can recapture and let the writ of Damascus run in the country is very doubtful now.
There seems to be popular support for Assad as well, because, you know, the people who left in Syria, those who have run away from the ISIS-controlled areas are all, I mean, who are living in areas controlled by Assad, are supporting him, and he's got popularity. So, I mean, even if a democratic process comes about, he probably will win an election. So, in this new scenario, the new ground realities, perhaps he has to be part of the solution, isn't it?
Oh, I think you can't avoid him.
Yes.
I mean, you simply cannot say that he shouldn't be there. Maybe that old plan about a transition thing, but the point is you must understand what you are transiting to. So unless and until you have a clear idea, you see, this is the problem with that happened in Libya, that you wanted regime change, but you had no idea what you wanted thereafter. And so you made a complete mess of things, meaning the Europeans. So I think you have to be very clear that, okay, Assad's the bad guy, whatever it is, but as long as he maintains a certain level of stability in the region that he controls, he's got to be there. The transition should not be one which further destabilizes Syria and the whole thing goes up in smoke.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. Do stay with us, gentlemen, and do stay with us. We are discussing possible solutions to the Syrian crisis and the possibility of a truce. Do stay with us.
NRI लड़के से शादी हुई तो फैमिली में सब बहुत खुश हुए, लेकिन विदेश पहुंचकर मालूम पड़ा कि मेरे हस्बैंड ने शादी के लिए सब झूठ बोला था। काम काज से लेकर प्रॉपर्टी तक के बारे में सब इन्फॉर्मेशन गलत थी। मेरे साथ उसका बर्ताव दिन पर दिन खराब होता गया, मारपीट, मेंटल टॉर्चर, और जब पता चला कि वो पहले से ही शादीशुदा है तो मैं बिल्कुल टूट गई। विदेश में रहते हुए उसके चंगुल से निकलना मेरे लिए मुश्किल था।
NRI लड़के से शादी तय करने से पहले उसका एम्प्लॉयमेंट रिकॉर्ड, सोशल सिक्योरिटी नंबर, पासपोर्ट डिटेल्स और मैरिटल स्टेटस के बारे में अच्छी तरह से जान लेना बहुत ही जरूरी है। और ध्यान रखें, NRI शादी को भारत में ही कानूनन दर्ज करवाएं। गलत NRI शादी में फंस चुकी कोई भी महिला तुरंत मदद के लिए पुलिस और एम्बेसी में संपर्क कर सकती है। और साथ ही राष्ट्रीय महिला आयोग की वेबसाइट पर जाकर NRI सेल में ऑनलाइन कंप्लेंट भी रजिस्टर कर सकती है।
बहुत बहुत बधाई हो, आपने अपने बच्चों को पोलियो से बचा लिया। लेकिन जब तक दुनिया में पोलियो का एक भी केस है, पोलियो का खतरा बना हुआ है। इसीलिए अब सरकार देश में पोलियो इंजेक्शन की शुरुआत कर रही है, ताकि आपके बच्चे को मिले डबल सुरक्षा। अब अपने 1 साल से छोटे बच्चे को टीकाकरण सत्र में पोलियो की तीसरी खुराक के साथ जरूर दिलवाएं पोलियो का इंजेक्शन। क्यों राधा, इससे क्या होगा पता है ना?
हाँ दीदी, पोलियो से डबल सुरक्षा हमेशा के लिए।
याद रहे, पोलियो की तीसरी खुराक के साथ जरूर दिलवाएं पोलियो का इंजेक्शन।
अधिक जानकारी के लिए अपने पास के स्वास्थ्य केंद्र, ANM या आशा दीदी से संपर्क करें।
अरे वाह, हार तो बड़ा सुंदर है तुम्हारा। आर्टिफिशियल है क्या?
आर्टिफिशियल? असली सोने का है। ढेरों डिजाइन्स में से चूज किया है मैंने।
फिर तो BIS हॉलमार्क का निशान भी जरूर होगा। सिर्फ डिजाइन्स और चमक से नहीं, असली सोने का भरोसा होता है हॉलमार्क का निशान, क्योंकि सोना सिर्फ आभूषण नहीं है, ये है जिंदगी भर की पूंजी।
किशोर अवस्था हम सब की जिंदगी का बहुत ही अहम पड़ाव होता है, जिसमें हम सब बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण शारीरिक और मानसिक बदलावों से गुजरते हैं। इस उम्र में खून की कमी यानी अनीमिया काफी आम है, जिसके कारण कमजोरी, चिड़चिड़ापन और थकान जैसी शिकायतें आती हैं। सप्ताह में एक बार IFA की नीली गोली लेना किशोर अवस्था में विकास के लिए सहायक होता है। ये नीली गोली शासकीय शालाओं, आंगनबाड़ी केंद्रों और शासकीय स्वास्थ्य संस्थाओं में निशुल्क मिलती है। मैं आशा करती हूँ कि आप सब किशोर और किशोरियां साप्ताहिक IFA की इस नीली गोली का सेवन जरूर करेंगे।
अस्पताल में गंदगी हो सकती है, कुछ छूना मत और बीमार पड़ जाओगी।
अरे दीदी, अब सब बदल रहा है।
इतनी साफ सफाई?
जी, हम सब ने मेहनत की है ताकि आपके इलाज में कोई कमी ना आए।
बदल रहा है, बदल रहे हैं। स्वास्थ्य केंद्र अब स्वच्छ हो रहे हैं और ये आपके ब्लॉक में भी संभव है। बस पहल करनी पड़ेगी, हमको और आपको भी। स्वच्छता का संकल्प करें, स्वास्थ्य केंद्र का कायाकल्प।
Welcome back. Well, before the break, we were looking at the significant role of Mr. Assad, or President Assad, in the solution. Now, some out-of-box thinking even suggests that perhaps the United Nations can take control of this country. Is it even possible for the United Nations, a new kind of thinking where temporarily the United Nations takes control of a country and, till it gains some sort of till the ground realities establish themselves, and then you can have a different democratic government or something? Is it even possible? I mean, as a diplomat, these are diplomatic ideas that are coming out.
Let's not talk about possible. Let's talk about probability.
Okay.
It is possible that United Nations takes over the government, so to speak, in this country. But how will it make sure there is stability? There are too many people out there with guns, with all kinds of rebels, etc. Will the United Nations have the necessary force to actually enforce its writ throughout the country? So it's probably a very difficult proposition for that to happen.
Okay.
United Nations probably is better placed to play a role to bring all the sides together, which is what it's trying to do in Geneva, but with the backing of the major powers. Because if the P5 do not want anything to happen, the United Nations basically becomes impotent, and it cannot do anything very much. So I don't think that the United Nations' role will be actually to run the country, but more as a facilitator, which is what is being tried at Geneva.
Fair enough.
If that solution comes, if all sides agree, okay, but then what do you do with Assad? Assad is not going to give up power. So he's going to stay there. So I don't think the United Nations, they can help in the process. They can provide UN peacekeeping troops, which they have done in many parts of the world successfully. So I think that is the solution, or could be a solution.
Mr. Joshi, the United Nations has tried in the past. The Kofi Annan plan was also UN-sponsored. And we have the Geneva process, which is also UN-sponsored. We have a UN special envoy who's actually come up with various kind of solutions himself. And we've seen so many peace initiatives with the United Nations backing, which have all failed. Right from Arab League plans, Friends of Syria, etc. There are so many processes. So in the end, when let's say Russia and the United States say that they have some sort of a plan, does the international community or people who are watchers, strategic affairs watchers, believe that this is a solution?
See, some of the really big problem as to what is happening in Syria is being created by countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey and some external intervention, perhaps Iran. What these two big powers, the United States and Russia, can do is to lean on some of these smaller countries. You see, this is one thing which is manageable. You can get the Americans lean on the Saudis, on the Turks, the Russians lean on the Turks. Maybe if we can get this external element out of the picture, and then start to work on the internal element. You see, so I think the Americans and the Russians have probably discussed this and gamed this fairly thoroughly. I have no doubt in my mind. I think when they say that they have a peace plan, they probably do have a peace plan. But I think that peace plan, there are aspects of that plan which cannot be public, in the sense that if you're going to lean on the Saudis, and there are the problem is there are lots of interconnected stuff. For example, this is also linked to Libya and linked to the Europeans, linked to the resolve that the United States as the world's leading power today,
right, and
which unfortunately happens to be in election mode, is able to bring to bear. Right. So I don't see the United States bringing to bear its real influence till at least the middle of next year.
Right.
So this is So this is in a sense a kind of a holding operation that they can undertake. I don't know whether
Mr. Chakravarty, the world has been watching this for 5 years now. And look at the kind of migration, people who are displaced, the kind of violence. Just yesterday, 150 people killed. And sort of, spectators who are just watching something like this take place. And there are a lot of debates also that are on in social media as to what solutions could be. And many of them even say that, the US should have invaded. And we saw that there were airstrikes that the US started. There were Russian airstrikes. What is this, this limited military campaign from the air? Did it actually make things worse, or how would you look at it?
Air campaigns have never actually brought stability to a country. I mean, it can bomb, destroy, degrade, and those are the words the Americans used against. I mean, what is the purpose of your airstrikes? Those are the words exactly that were used by the Americans to against the IS, for example. That is what their intention was. But ultimately, as I come back to my earlier point, that how will you have stability in a country when there are so many groups are fighting each other? It's a civil war.
Okay.
So unless there is ceasefire, they agree to at least talk about all these things, and the external powers like Turkey, Iran and Saudi Arabia also agree to stop, for example, supplying weapons. But then everybody is worried that their protégé may be killed or they might be removed from the scene. And in the ultimate analysis, when the actual, the peace plan is worked out, who gets hold of power, they want their proxies to be on the table also and to share that power. So it's a complete mess as far as I can see.
Okay.
And of course the IS factor is there. How will they finally wind up the IS? That itself
it is the mess that has created the IS, in fact, and given them the kind of power.
The external power intervention has created it. Also, the mishandling of the initial riots and demonstrations that took part of the March of 2000.
Okay, we need to take another short break. Do stay with us. You're watching a discussion on the possible truce in Syria.
H1N1 फ्लू को फैलने से रोका जा सकता है। खांसी और छींक के बाद और बच्चे को छूने से पहले अपने हाथों को साबुन से धोकर H1N1 फ्लू को फैलने से रोक सकते हैं। इन्फेक्शन रोको, बनो हीरो। इलाज सिर्फ चुने हुए अस्पतालों में उपलब्ध।
अस्पताल में गंदगी हो सकती है, कुछ छूना मत और बीमार पड़ जाओगे।
अरे दीदी, अब सब बदल रहा है।
इतनी साफ सफाई?
जी, हम सब ने मेहनत की है ताकि आपके इलाज में कोई कमी ना आए।
बदल रहा है, बदल रहे हैं। स्वास्थ्य केंद्र अब स्वच्छ हो रहे हैं और ये आपके ब्लॉक में भी संभव है। बस पहल करनी पड़ेगी हमको और आपको भी। स्वच्छता का संकल्प करें, स्वास्थ्य केंद्र का कायाकल्प।
अरे वाह, हार तो बड़ा सुंदर है तुम्हारा। आर्टिफिशियल है क्या?
आर्टिफिशियल? असली सोने का है। ढेरों डिजाइन्स में से चूज किया है मैंने।
फिर तो BIS हॉलमार्क का निशान भी जरूर होगा। सिर्फ डिजाइन्स और चमक से नहीं, असली सोने का भरोसा होता है हॉलमार्क का निशान, क्योंकि सोना सिर्फ आभूषण नहीं है, ये है जिंदगी भर की पूंजी।
जागो ग्राहक जागो।
आप सबने दुनिया भर में क्या मिसाल बनाई है। जिस सफाई से आपने कचरा वहीं फेंक दिया, और मन्नू आंटी क्या कूड़ा फेंकती हैं। ओलंपिक्स के गोला फेंकने वाले भी शर्मा जाएं। और ये देखिए, लक्ष्मी भाभी की सफाई तो गांव-गांव में प्रसिद्ध है। हमारे सुखिया भैया मन की करते, जहां सोचा वहीं शौच कर दिया। ये देश जो आप ही का घर है, उसे क्यों गंदा करते हैं? थोड़ी शर्म कर लो, सोच स्वच्छ कर लो।
अगर एक बार 125 करोड़ देशवासी तय कर लें कि मैं गंदगी नहीं करूंगा, तो दुनिया की कोई ताकत नहीं है जो हिंदुस्तान को गंदा कर सकती है।
स्वच्छ भारत, एक कदम स्वच्छता की ओर।
Welcome back, and let's turn to Mr. Manoj Joshi now. Well, the ground realities have changed, and new realities have taken root. There are so many players involved. As Mr. Chakravarty was saying, everyone would want their proxies to be looked after. So, given that scenario, I mean, in this sort of negotiation for a truce, how many people can be sitting at this table to negotiate it? Because what actually did happen in Geneva is that the Syrian government and the opposition didn't even want to sit at the same table. So there was no peace process or no talks that could come forward.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that the real role here is of the big boys, meaning the United States and Russia. And
what about China?
China, has been scrupulously avoiding playing any kind of a global role in such matters. So, but Russia, because it is actually there, it's got military forces on the ground, and it's using those military forces, and the United States. But the problem, as I explained to you, is that the United States is in an election mode now.
That's right.
The Russians, I think, are very cautious. Meaning, I think their air intervention has helped in the sense it cut the IS oil links to Turkey.
Right.
So that was very important because the IS has been squeezed now for.
Is there a deeper game for Russia over here, Mr. Joshi? Because, there are some commentators who say that Russia is really going to play a much bigger role in this area. They've already, apparently, much of Iran, they also played a significant role there. They have been playing for much of the time. Now Syria too, in a new scenario, they would be playing a greater role. And, on the world stage, emerge as a much more powerful force.
See, the Russians have historically wanted to play a role beyond the Black Sea and beyond Turkey. Turkey, the Ottoman Empire was their big blockade there. The problem for the Russians right now is their economy. The economy isn't doing well. Yes, it's true that their military has become much, much better in recent years. They've invested a lot in their military. Their military capacity is pretty good, and which they have revealed in Syria.
Okay.
But I think when it comes to, they've also learned a lesson from Afghanistan.
Sure.
And I don't think that beyond a point they would like to intervene to the point where it becomes a quagmire. So therefore they are reaching out to the United States. They're trying to work with the United States. So that era where Russians and the Americans were on the opposite side is over. The Russians are saying, we're in a cooperative mode. Let's get this done together.
Sure.
These are our interests. You tell us what your interests are.
Okay.
I have a feeling that the problem with the other side, the Americans really don't know what their interests are.
Okay.
Not very clear.
That's true. Mr. Chakravarty, some people say if you just look at the problem, the first thing you need to do is provide relief to the victims, at least get that organized. If the main purpose of the cessation of hostilities is at least provide this, then move forward, move towards trying to rebuild the country and whatever models you're looking at. In the first stage, at least, you feel that the two major powers that have come together will try and find some sort of relief, at least for the victims.
Well, as you know, some relief convoys have been organized for certain cities and towns which were besieged, and food and water and basic medicines were not getting through. So that has been organized, and that's usually a beginning point when all sides agree to provide humanitarian convoys go in.
Right.
So there is an element of restraint being shown. Okay, let's at least get this part going on the basis of humanity and humanitarian sort of.
And would you see a long-term solution that could be democratic? I mean, I did raise the question of Russia and perhaps its greater influence, but there is a feeling that Russia is ceasing to be democratic because it has one person in power, and China has its own model. So the powers that are going to come to the fore will not be democratic.
Well, I don't think that any other blueprint other than a certain democratic transition will bring stability to that region, and that is why I said perhaps that's not going to happen, because there's no history of democracy in those regions at all.
Okay.
And so you might see autonomous regions emerging
feel
out
that the
of
country
the
will
old
break
Syria,
up. Okay.
And you can have that kind of a thing.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us on this special discussion. Well, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who has been in power since his father's demise in 2000 and who has carried forward the power established by his father, General al-Assad, through a coup in 1970, is willing to accept the cessation of hostility only if terrorists aren't allowed to use it to their advantage. And he said that the word ceasefire cannot be used. It's not the right word, he said, because these are armies. That ceasefire is only used between countries and armies. And he said that the more important factors are preventing terrorists from using this cessation of hostility to improve their position in his country. Now, amid all this, John Kerry has made it clear that he says, in fact, make no mistake, the answer to the Syrian civil war will not be found with a military alliance with Assad. The Americans will not have any part with him in the solution. So this is really the problem. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.